Thanks for joining the Closer to the Dirt podcast. I'm your host and author, BJ Emerson, and I'm talking with readers today about the Edenberry Chronicles, a little bit of already. Welcome back to the Closer to the Dirt podcast. I'm your host and author, BJ Emerson. And with me today is a very special guest, a very super creative guy, filmmaker, and reader of the Edenberry Chronicles, Nick Leach. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me on, BJ. Happy to be here.
Looking forward to a great conversation. So, spoiler alert, we're talking about the end of the book. So, if you haven't read the whole book, then you don't want to listen to this yet. So, you just finished the book. And so, what happened at the end of the book?
It just wraps the story up really well. I mean, what really stuck out to me is just the relationships, and that's what is really strong in this book, is just the relationships of the people that are in the town. I mean, we have relationships with Stephanie and Father Vance, we have the relationship between Zeke and Lucy and everything, and so like where those relationships are going to go in the future is really exciting to me.
So Zeke and Lucy get engaged. They're not married yet, so there could be problems that occur before they get married. I don't know. Will they have kids? Will those kids be special?
Where are they going to be? I mean, Zeke is talking about we have so many other places. I mean, they're both out of jobs at this point.
But I solved that problem, right?
Exactly. We solved that problem where do they
How
really
convenient.
How convenient. Do they really need jobs from now on? But it gives them the opportunity now to explore the other towns and explore the other areas that they could go. The town that really sticks out to me is Dunhaven because it's very similar to my past experience. And
the experience of many others.
And the experience of many others. And seeing if they went, say, to Dunhaven, what could happen? How could they help that town? There's just so many opportunities going forward.
What if they go to another country?
Exactly.
You know, could they go to what other thing? But here's the thing. What other industries could they tackle? What other industries don't want to see heaven come to earth? What other industries capitalize on the brokenness of humanity? Right? And so one that a friend of mine threw out, Jed, he threw out funeral homes.
Yeah.
Will we need those?
Right.
Later, and why would somebody be incentivized to want to keep that industry going? I don't know.
Yeah.
Just like insurance, you don't need insurance in heaven, right? So industries that capitalize on the brokenness of humanity, maybe that's something to explore. What other,
or even to explore what industry can exploit, what can turn the amazingness that is happening, the healing mists, the healing springs that are popping up, to exploit that, and that's an option too.
Yeah. Let me ask you this, Nick. What was your favorite bizarre act of nature?
Well, I would say probably the rocks, just because it's such a huge part throughout the rest of the book. I mean, the fact that they rose up and then, or they just appeared, and then from the tops of this thing, like, you can see other things. So it's much more than just the rocks in that act that's so fascinating. If I had to choose a favorite character, it probably either would be Rebecca or Anne. Because they are just such spitfires, and they just say how it is. I mean, Rebecca's out there trying to get money from other people to see the tree, her friend.
Well, she wanted to sell tickets to the church because it was standing room only, and she saw an opportunity.
Exactly.
But if you remember, she also tithed on her money. She had a whole handful of ones, and she put it in the offering basket.
At the end there, yeah, exactly. And so it's their innocence that I love, and it's their ability to just unabashedly worship.
Yeah.
Unabashedly say, hey, why can't you hear what I'm hearing
By
too?
default, they heard things and thought it was like, hey, this is normal.
And where is it in our life that we lose that?
Yeah, good question. So I ask a lot of people like what their favorite characters are and what their favorite bizarre act of nature is, and just like to hear different perspectives. And so I do appreciate that. I haven't heard the rocks before and the kids. And I wondered, because a lot of it was like, Father Vance or Lucy, Zeke. But then the kids, so I was thinking, in the future episodes, do I need kids in there? Does that make sense? Does that resonate with people? But I think the mystery definitely needs to be there. And so we'll see what new characters, come about. What new bizarre acts of nature, what new industries will be for us that they'll need to tackle, right?
And I think just to go a little bit further into why I love the kids so much, I mean, I love Rebecca and Anne because it relates a bit to who I am. I've always felt a little bit younger than I am.
Childish,
I've also,
immature.
oh, well, maybe. My wife might tell you that. But I've always hung out with younger people, and I can be mature. Yet there's still aspects. Why can't we have fun? Why can't we still try and experience some of the childhood? I mean, And so I think when people say grow up, I think that a lot of us think we have to get rid of our childish ways. And there's something to be said about that. There's immature ways of acting, but then there's also great things about childhood that we tend to lose, such as our sense of adventure, our sense of curiosity, our sense of having fun. And that's what I'm constantly doing. I have game nights all the time. I'm trying to have fun, have adventures. And I think God asks us to find me in everything that I've given you. Find me.
I like that.
One thing that really stood out to me in reading the book was knowing you as a filmmaker and having our relationship as filmmakers together and creatives. I was reading the book and I could just see everything that was on the page there. And it was very much written kind of like a screenplay. And so I want to know, is that kind of, I mean, you can't help if that's how you write because that's who you are.
Right.
Has a visual medium been something that you've thought of with where this could go?
Sure. That was actually how it started. With my vision was this is going to be eventually a streaming series. And so that's how I wrote it, with the cliffhangers and then wrapping up and this would be like the first season, right? And then it would go on to something else. But it's the Edenberry Chronicles, and then a little bit of Already is the first season. So that's what I had in my mind as I wrote it. And originally I actually wrote it as a screenplay, and my wife, who's helping me edit, she said, "This is not a script. You're writing a novel here." And so I was like, "Oh, okay." I changed the format, and so that was something I had to do. And I think I got better as I went along. So yeah, definitely an interesting journey in how it was written, and what I would love to see happen with it in the future.
One thing that you and I in past conversations have talked about is what is going to come next for specifically not just more writing of other books, but what other ways have you thought of or have started to pursue of where you can take this?
Yeah. Well, I think God, it calls us into creating culture. That was in Genesis 1 and 2. That's essentially hey, go create cool stuff, build cities, right? I guess I would rephrase that question to be like, well, how are you going to create culture with this concept, with these themes? And again, it's been helpful for me to see things differently. And so, I can write obviously more. This is a great format I think I want to do more of. And it's really, I think what I want to do is help others see things differently. And man, it is so rewarding to hear people say, this has moved me. I see creation differently. I see people differently, because I want to back up to Genesis 1 and not start at Genesis 3 with people. Can I see you as made in God's image first? And then we can talk about the problems that we have and why we have the problems that we have. And then what's the solution? And we can be a part. And then what's my role in this new creation as it breaks forth? A little bit of Already. How do we create culture around that? And I think that's part of our jobs and the role that we'll have. again, it really helped me to process a lot of this for myself, I think. And again, I see creation differently. I see people differently. And I hope that continues. And, do we ramp that up? Do we get more, explicit about these themes and people? Is there more confrontation? There wasn't a lot of conflict in this book.
Not
there wasn't
really.
a lot of bad guys.
Not really.
Other than Heathrow. So who are the bad guys in this story?
Well, I think we can first say that there's a grand institution that is the bad guys, and that is Heathrow. But there's a couple other characters in there that are more antagonistic.
Okay.
And more bad guys, implicit bad guys. I mean, there is Mayor Davies that turns out to be a bad guy in the end.
Yeah.
Or more working with the bad guys. Also, the president of the company and the daughter.
Yes. Heathrow. Yep.
Of Heathrow. But I think there definitely are a couple antagonists that are very interesting. I mean, Andrea, we can say, is an antagonist throughout this, and then comes to have a change in her character in the end.
So I think in the conversation that Zeke has with Andrea, he gave her more information. He drew a bigger circle, and he challenged. He gave her more facts, and she responded as a journalist. And he said, "Look, Heathrow is behind your paper. They've been funding your paper this whole time, and that's why they have this subscription to your paper." Right, and oh, by the way, your grandfather, there was two different articles, and the reason why there's two different articles, and he let her come to this realization, there was two different articles because he was giving Heathrow different information than what was happening locally on the ground, and so when she realized that, she flipped and said, "Oh no, I'm against Heathrow now." But what she wanted, her objective was to get out of Edenbury and to be in the national news, in a bigger media outlet, in a bigger market, right? And ultimately, at the very end, they're watching her on TV, sitting in the diner, and she's at the national news desk as an anchor doing her thing.
Which Zeke was able to help with his contacts in other places.
There was a short scene where Zeke walks into the newspaper office, and he punches the guy's name, Dave Jenkins, the news anchor. He punches his number in the phone, puts him on speakerphone, and says, "Hey, here's what's going on. I'm giving you the exclusive. Here's Andrea Glenn. She's got the details," and he leaves.
Right.
And that's where she gets the job eventually for this national news desk. So I thought that was kind of fun that he just walked in. But that was Zeke. He walked in, did his thing, and just left, and like mic drop. Here's your national news desk job.
Here she is, yeah.
Yeah. So that was fun. So for Angus, what happened there was in the very first chapter, there's a bat in the corner of the office, right? And then later, the bat falls over, and Zeke asks Lucy, "Where did the bat come from?" And then when Angus comes back from his fishing trip, he doesn't know what's going on. He's like, "You guys are, involved in this. What is happening here?" And they had gotten this ledger that showed where all the Warrenwood was sold, and in the ledger was a bat that was sold to Angus's father. And Angus's father gave the bat to Angus, and Angus had this great, high school baseball career, right? It was his glory days, and him and the bat were inseparable, and that's what made him a great, so it was Warrenwood bat, which you're gonna be a better baseball player if you have this bat, apparently.
Exactly.
When Angus sees this, he's like, "Oh man," and that's how he gets flipped to becoming a protagonist. And now he's like, "Okay, we're against Heathrow because they're bad." Where would you like to see the book go next? What needs to be written next in your mind?
Well,
You want me to give you some options?
yes.
We could go into the past 50 years,
Yeah.
back to the Warren farm with the original grove of trees that showed up back then, or all the way back to 1860 and the drought and the prophet and the tent revival and people pulled down heaven. That was the concept. Someone pulled down heaven.
Yeah.
And Father Gregory just said that casually, like, "Oh, someone just pulled down heaven." And everybody's like, "Is that difficult?
Right.
Does that happen very often?" So there's that concept.
what this story needs is a little bit more context to some of these ideas. And so I think that it'd be really fun to go back to, say, 1860 or during the time that, I mean, because I really enjoy the mystery of the, what are these concepts, what has happened in the past. And so if that is maybe even going back to Stephanie's dad, and his experience, what that was like.
Yep.
It'll give us as an audience a little bit more of the context.
So there will definitely be mystery. It's a mystery series, so we have to have that.
Of course.
Some of the characters either way. There's characters that we've introduced that I need to explore further, and then I'm just thinking through. Okay, what resonated with readers as I wrote this first one that we need to continue. Obviously, I want to, but as I wrote it, I really wrote it for me, and it was transformational for me to write it. But actually, when I started, I gave my mother the chapters as I wrote them, and she read them to my grandmother, who's well into her 90s now, and that was my week. I was like, write it, and she's like, okay, give me the next. We're ready for the next thing, and that was very. But then, as other people started reading it along as well, then they're like, give me the next chapter. I can't believe that happened, or you did that, So that was a lot of fun, really helped me, to continue writing. And now I'll start again here pretty soon.
Well, let me ask you this, BJ. Where kind of, the biggest question that I have for you is, like, what made you want to write this book? What made you want to have this exercise, and particularly this subject?
Well, the key verse is actually in Father Vance's first sermon, and that's this Romans 8 concept, this ancient agenda that I called it, right? Where creation has something to say, and maybe creation is just like, hey, can we give you a little reminder of what Eden was like, okay? The Garden of Eden, Genesis 1, 2. And, can we also give you a preview of the new earth, new creation, because we're subject to futility as well. And so now creation has this like personality, this persona. I'm like, what would creation's persona be? Is it fun? Well, it was, does it reflect God created all this. How does it reflect his character, right? And so I think that's something to be explored. And maybe we'll see more of that. Does creation get even bolder than, because there was a progression. And that's what Father Gregory said, is like, creation's getting bolder in its invitation to us in being a part of this new creation that's coming forth. It's a little bit of already. It's this new creation is already happening, started with the resurrection of Jesus. And now we're called into that. But for some people, that's difficult. So, Nick, you came out of a church background that a lot of the mindset of Dunhaven was in that. Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in a church and religion and denomination that was very much the mindset of Dunhaven of let's try to escape this world that we're on. Let's not take care of the earth because we're waiting for Jesus to come back. And that's really all that mattered.
For me, in my mind, and maybe this is too simplistic, does the gospel start at Genesis 3, where it says we're all sinners, and yes, we are in need of rescue and redemption, or do we back up and start at Genesis 1 and include the part about God's good creation, that we're made in God's image, and if we start at Genesis 1, do we see people differently, and do we see creation differently? Has that been your experience?
I'll say that my experience prior to this book was one, and after this book is another. It's a transformative experience because my upbringing and most of my life, it was more of a Genesis 3. But I'm coming to understand, I mean, it's like a no-brainer when you think about it, of God created the rest of the earth, so why doesn't that matter too?
But how did Father Gregory and Father Vance kind of respond to these other people in Dunhaven? They were pretty patient with them, right? So maybe was that a good was that a good example of how we should do that?
Absolutely. I think that we need to respond to anybody who has different beliefs than us with grace and understanding.
Yeah.
Just because I grew up in a certain faith with a certain different set of beliefs doesn't mean that I need to feel that I know more now than them. It also doesn't mean that now with my new understanding, treat them any differently or treat them as if they now were, or that they were wrong.
Well, how do you help them?
You help them by, number one, just being open, challenging. Because I think that just not saying anything and not trying to challenge their beliefs is being very passive. And that's not helpful, number one, for your relationship with them.
Yeah.
So I think, number one, challenge their beliefs. Also, they may challenge your beliefs.
Yeah.
And that's good. Also, being understanding that that as much as they may not have all the information, we don't either.
Yeah.
Again, I go back to no man knows the day nor the time. That
It does say that.
God told us. And God, a relationship is always revealing more and more about another person. And so just as much as we are trying to create a relationship with God, we're also continuing to build our relationship with that other person too, with family. I mean, that's something that I deal with right now all the time, is a family that believes differently than me. And is it more important for the relationship for me to be right?
Yeah.
Or to love them?
Could you be just really subversive and give them the book and like, hey,
I could do that, and I've
this
thought
book?
about that for sure.
No, I'm just kidding.
No.
Let me ask you what you think about this. When we value creation, we value the creator. When we take care of creation, we are helping point people to the creator. So is that a thing? You know, hey, let's take care of the earth, because if we do take care of the earth, we're actually taking care of people. So I'll let you answer that.
I mean, that was God's first thing to Adam. He said, Adam, take care of the earth.
But what did the fall change? Did the fall change all that we now, like, oh no, it's no longer valid?
I don't think so. I think that everything out there in creation absolutely does cry out God's name. And if everything cries out God's name, why shouldn't we take care of that? Why shouldn't it matter? And why shouldn't we then be able to say to others, here's how you can also see God? I mean, God gives us so many ways to experience Him and to experience and have a relationship with Him. And so if I'm able to see God in the scriptures, if I'm able to see God through worship music, shouldn't I also be able to see God through nature?
It is pointing to Him all the time. And then that's clear in the scripture, not even Genesis 1 and 2. We can see in Psalms. I wonder sometimes, and again, through reading this and reading other books like Heaven by Randy Alcorn, I like Surprised by Hope by N.T. Wright, and other books. But as I see now, and around here in eastern North Carolina, we have these crepe myrtles, and in the spring, they have these beautiful colors. They might be white or pink or red or whatever. And what if that was their praise? What if that foliage? What if those flowering trees or plants or whatever, anything? And what if we could hear that? What if there was a sense that we don't have? And we know that animals have senses that we don't have.
We also know that we as humans only access about 20% of our brain capacity.
Right.
What if we could have more of that?
But we just drive by these things, and
Exactly.
we don't even see them anymore.
No.
Right? Maybe in the spring we're like, oh, there's a pretty dogwood tree flowering, you know.
But it's a
for the
pretty
most part,
dogwood. It's not. That is God's creation. That's a beautiful creation
that's
of God.
worship for
Yeah.
that creation to the Creator.
Exactly.
And we don't see that. So yeah, I think that's an interesting concept that could be explored more, but just our awareness. And I think that's kind of what closer to the dirt means. It's that humility, being able to hear. Little children can hear. They're sensitive in ways that maybe older people kind of lose the signal.
Oh, yeah.
Is what someone said, I think, to Grandpa Wilkes, right?
Yes.
So just one more question, Nick. Why would you recommend this book to somebody else? Why should they read it?
Well, I can say from a personal standpoint, this book was able to really help challenge some of the beliefs that I had, to challenge a lot of the notions that I had been raised with. And so I think I would absolutely recommend this book for anyone really who I would say Christian or non-Christian. I mean, this is a book that can open people's eyes, to change lives, to change minds, and to really show something that isn't talked about a lot. We don't talk about heaven on earth a lot. We don't talk about creation as much. So I'm absolutely going to be giving this book to people, recommending it to people. A lot of my family, I feel, needs to read this book. A lot of the friends that I grew up with, I feel, need to read this book. And I'm glad you wrote it, because if you hadn't written it, I probably may not have read it myself. And it has been truly transformative in my own faith.
Well, thank you for being part of creating culture and being a part of it. And thanks for joining
Thanks for
the
having me.
podcast.
Absolutely.